What if the holiest man on earth found his truest solace in the quiet presence of a humble nurse? Can a whispered goodbye spoken on the edge of eternity bridge the divide between this world and the divine? How could a bond forged in hospital shadows reveal the deepest truths of a pontiff's sacred heart? What hidden moments did Pope Francis share with the man he called his guardian angel in his final days? Are you ready to uncover a tale of friendship that transcends the mortal veil, echoing into the realm of the eternal? In the sterile corridors of a Roman hospital, a sacred bond unfolds unseen by the world's watchful eyes. A pope and his nurse stand at the threshold of life and death, their connection a testament to the divine within the human. The air in room 312 Gemelli Hospital is heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the faint musk of old books, a quiet stillness broken only by the rhythmic beep of medical monitors, their steady pulse a fragile tether to life. The dawn light filters through the blinds, casting golden streaks across the tiled floor, illuminating a simple wooden cross on the bedside table, its edges worn smooth by years of fervent prayer. A soft breeze slips through a cracked window, carrying the distant toll of Roman church bells, their mournful song weaving through the room like a celestial lament, as if the city itself senses the sacred departure that looms, a departure that will unite the earthly and the divine in a final tender embrace. What does it mean to witness the final breath of a shepherd, to hold the hand of a saint as he crosses into eternity, bearing the weight of his unspoken truths? In the early hours of April 21st, 2025, the world stood still as news broke from the Vatican Pope. Francis, the 206th shepherd of the Catholic Church, had passed into the arms of the divine at the age of 88. His death coming mere hours after a poignant Easter Sunday appearance in St. Peter's Square sent waves of grief across the globe, from the cobblestone streets of Rome to the farthest reaches of the faithful, their prayers rising like incense to the heavens, their hearts heavy with the loss of a man who had been a beacon of hope in a world of darkness. But within the quiet walls of Gemelli Hospital, where Francis had spent his final days, a story unfolded that few would ever know, a story of a sacred bond between the pontiff and the man who had become his closest companion in those waning moments, a man who stood as his guardian, his confidant, his friend, Massimiliano Strapetti, a nurse whose presence had been a silent pillar of strength through the storms of Francis's final years. Massimiliano Strapetti, a 56-year-old Italian nurse with over 3 decades of service, was no stranger to the Vatican's hallowed halls. His skilled hands and compassionate heart had cared for popes before, but it was his relationship with Francis that would etch his name into the annals of history, a relationship that transcended the boundaries of duty, blossoming into a friendship that spoke of the divine within the human, a friendship that would become a testament to the power of presence, of gratitude, of love. Their journey together began in the summer of 2021, when Francis, then 84, faced a life-threatening crisis, a severe case of diverticulitis that required emergency surgery to remove part of his colon. The operation was a grueling ordeal, its complexity a shadow over the pontiff's fragile frame, and many feared that the man who had redefined the papacy with his humility and compassion might not survive the night. Through those critical days, it was Strapetti who stood as the sentinel of Francis's recovery, his presence a constant in the sterile chaos of the hospital room, his hands deft as they adjusted IV lines, his eyes sharp as they monitored every change in the pontiff's condition. One afternoon, as Strapetti worked to ensure the delicate balance of fluids that kept Francis alive, the Pope, his strength returning in faint whispers, caught the nurse's wrist with a grip that belied his frail form. "You saved my life." "Massimiliano," Francis whispered, his voice a fragile thread, his eyes locking with Strapetti's, their depths alight with a gratitude that seemed to pierce the veil between the earthly and the divine. Strapetti, ever humble, tried to deflect the praise, his cheeks flushing with a quiet modesty, but Francis insisted, his voice firm despite its weakness. "No, you listened when others might have waited. God worked through your hands." From that moment, a bond was forged that went beyond the roles of caregiver and patient. A bond rooted in trust and vulnerability, in a mutual recognition of the sacred within the human. Francis would later confide to his closest advisors that Strapetti possessed the heart of a true healer, one who saw not just the body, but the soul, one who understood that the greatest act of mercy was not in grand gestures, but in the quiet daily presence that spoke of love, of care, of compassion. In 2022, Francis made a decision that reflected his lifelong commitment to honoring the unseen, elevating Strapetti to the role of his personal healthcare coordinator, a position traditionally held by physicians, but one that Francis entrusted to a nurse, a man whose hands had saved him, whose heart had seen him, whose presence had become a sanctuary in a world of storms. In Massimiliano, Francis once said, during a private audience, his voice a whisper that seemed to rise like a prayer, "I see the face of Christ, the healer, present not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of mercy, a face that reminds us of the divine within the human, a face that calls us to serve, to love, to be present for those who suffer." The bond between these two men grew through small, intimate moments that the cameras of the world never captured, moments that spoke of a friendship that transcended the boundaries of title and status, moments that revealed the profound humanity of a man who sat on the throne of St. Peter. When Francis suffered from sciatica, its sharp pain making every step a trial, it was Strapetti who devised a routine of gentle stretches, his hands guiding the pontiff with a tenderness that eased the agony, his voice a soothing balm as he whispered words of encouragement, words that spoke of a care that went beyond duty, a care that spoke of love. During the long nights when insomnia plagued Francis, his mind restless with the burdens of his office, it was Strapetti who sat by his bedside, reading aloud from spiritual texts, his voice a steady rhythm that lulled the pontiff into a fragile peace. The words of the saints, a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a bridge that carried Francis through the darkness of the night, a bridge that spoke of a friendship that had become a sanctuary, a refuge, a light in a world of shadows. In February 2025, when Francis's health took a sharp decline, it was Strapetti who first noticed the subtle changes in his breathing, the faint irregularity that whispered of danger, his instincts honed by years of service, his heart attuned to the man he had come to know as more than a patient, as more than a pope, as a friend. The diagnosis of bilateral pneumonia was a shadow that loomed over Francis's final days, its danger amplified by his age and the respiratory issues that had haunted him since his youth. A shadow that tested the endurance of both men, a shadow that would become the crucible of their bond. Through the grueling 38 days of hospitalization that followed, Strapetti maintained a near constant vigil, his presence a silent pillar of strength in the sterile chaos of the hospital room, his hands deft as they adjusted oxygen levels, his eyes sharp as they monitored vital signs, his heart steadfast as he offered the one thing Francis needed most, the unwavering presence of a friend, a presence that spoke of love, of care, of compassion, a presence that said, "You're not alone in this darkness. Vatican sources would later report that Strappetti often slept on a cot in the Pope's room. His rest a fragile thing broken by the slightest change in Francis's breathing. His hands reaching for the medical bag at his side. His eyes never leaving the man who had become his friend, his brother, his sacred charge. He meticulously tracked medication timings, adjusted oxygen levels, monitored vital signs, and perhaps most importantly, offered the quiet presence that Francis needed. A presence that spoke of love, of care, of compassion. A presence that became a sanctuary in a world of storms. A presence that would become the foundation of their final moments together. One particularly moving moment occurred in early March 2025, about 3 weeks into the hospitalization after a difficult night of fever and coughing that had left Francis weakened his breath, a fragile thread, his spirit heavy with the weight of his suffering. As morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting golden stripes across the room, Francis seemed unusually contemplative. His eyes fixed on a distant point, his hands trembling as they clutched the wooden cross that had been his constant companion. Through the years, Strappetti was adjusting his pillows, his hands gentle as he sought to ease the pontiff's discomfort, when Francis gripped his hand with unexpected strength, his voice trembling as he spoke. "You are my guardian angel, Massimiliano," he said, his eyes glistening with emotion. "God sent you to guide me through this valley, a valley of shadows, a valley of sorrow, a valley that I could not have faced without you." Strappetti, overcome with emotion, could only nod his throat tight with tears, his heart heavy with the weight of a trust he felt unworthy to bear, yet determined to honor with every fiber of his being. Later, he would confide to a fellow nurse that he had never felt such a profound sense of responsibility, such a profound sense of love, such a profound sense of the divine within the human, a responsibility to be the guardian. Francis needed a love that transcended the boundaries of duty, a divine presence that spoke of the sacred bond that had grown between them, a bond that would carry them through the final days of Francis's earthly journey. By mid-April, Francis experienced what seemed like a recovery, his fever subsiding, his oxygen levels improving, the doctors speaking cautiously of releasing him back to his residence at Casa Santa Marta within the Vatican. Their words a faint whisper of hope in a world of shadows. During this period, the conversations between Francis and Strappetti deepened, the pontiff sharing memories of his childhood in Argentina, his early days as a priest, his unexpected journey to the papacy. Memories that spoke of a man who had lived with a heart open to the divine, a man who had sought to be the Pope. God wanted him to be a man who had carried the burdens of the world with a quiet grace that reflected the love of Christ. "I never wanted to be Pope," Francis confided one evening as Strappetti checked his vital signs, his voice a whisper that seemed to rise like a prayer, the scent of candle wax heavy in the air. "But I have tried to be the Pope. God wanted me to be a Pope who serves a Pope who loves a Pope who builds bridges where others build walls." Strappetti treasured these conversations, recognizing them as both a privilege and a sacred trust. Their words, a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a bridge that carried them through the darkness of the night, a bridge that spoke of a friendship that had become a sanctuary, a refuge, a light in a world of shadows. But even as the doctors spoke of recovery, those closest to Francis noticed subtle signs that he sensed his earthly journey was nearing its end, his spirit heavy with the weight of a mission that had been both a blessing and a burden, his heart alight with the hope of the eternal, his hands trembling as he put his papers in order, wrote brief notes to close friends, and spent more time in prayer, his lips moving in silent communion with the divine, his eyes fixed on a distant horizon, as if he could see the faces of those who awaited him in the Father's house. "Do you believe heaven is beautiful?" he asked Strapeti one evening as the hospital fell quiet, the scent of candle wax heavy in the air, the dim light casting shadows across his frail form. "I believe it's beyond anything we can imagine." Holy Father Strapeti replied, his voice steady, despite the tears that glistened in his eyes. Francis nodded, slowly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I think so too, but I believe the faces we'll see there will be even more beautiful than the place itself." Easter Sunday 2025 dawned with a quiet radiance. The faithful gathering in St. Peter's Square, their voices rising in hymns that echoed the joy of the risen Christ. Their hands outstretched as they sought the blessing of the Vicar of Christ. Their hearts alight with the hope of resurrection. Even as the shadow of Francis's frailty loomed over the celebration, despite his fragile condition, Francis expressed a strong desire to make one final appearance, to connect with his flock one last time, to offer a blessing that would become his final gift to the world. A gift of love, of peace, of hope. His doctors, concerned that the exertion could prove disastrous for his compromised lungs, advised against it, their voices a chorus of caution that echoed through the hospital halls, their hands trembling as they sought to protect the man who had become their sacred charge. But it was Strapeti who found himself caught between professional caution and understanding the Pope's spiritual need, his heart torn between the duty to protect and the desire to honor the man who had become his friend, his brother, his sacred charge. "Do you think I can manage it?" Massimiliano Francis asked, his voice, a whisper that seemed to rise like a prayer, his eyes alight with a determination that belied his frailty, a vulnerability that spoke of a man who knew his time was short, a man who sought to offer one final blessing to the world he loved. Strapeti studied the man before him, his heart heavy with the weight of a decision that could change everything. His hands trembling as he weighed the risks, his eyes fixed on the man who had become his friend, his brother, his sacred charge. "If we take every precaution, if we keep it brief, and if I'm with you every moment," he replied, his voice steady, despite the tears that glistened in his eyes. "Yes, Holy Father, I believe you can." The decision made, Strapeti orchestrated an extraordinary level of medical preparation, his hands deft as he arranged for portable oxygen emergency medications and a team of medical professionals strategically positioned along the route, his mind sharp as he modified the Pope-mobile to accommodate Francis's medical needs while remaining inconspicuous to the public, his heart alight with the hope that this final moment would be a gift to the world, a gift to the faithful, a gift to the man who had become his friend, his brother, his sacred charge. What followed was a moment that would be etched in the memory of everyone present, a moment that would become a testament to the power of love, of peace, of hope, a moment that would echo through the ages, a moment that would refuse to be silenced. As the Pope-mobile slowly circled St. Peter's Square, the crowd, initially murmuring with surprise at the unexpected appearance, fell into a hushed reverence, their voices a whisper as they called out to the man who had become their shepherd, their father, their voice in a world that so often turned away. Francis, visibly weakened, but with eyes alight, raised his hand in blessing, his smile, though tired, radiating a profound serenity, his presence a beacon of light in a world of shadows, a beacon of hope in a world of despair. a beacon of love in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. Strapeti stood discreetly at the rear of the vehicle, his medical bag at the ready, his eyes never leaving the Pope, his heart heavy with the weight of a responsibility he felt unworthy to bear, yet determined to honor with every fiber of his being. A responsibility to be the guardian Francis needed, a responsibility to be the friend Francis deserved, a responsibility to be the light in a world of shadows. Upon returning to the hospital, Francis was exhausted, but fulfilled his breath a fragile thread, his spirit alight with the joy of a mission complete, his heart heavy with the weight of a journey that was nearing its end. Strapeti helped him back into bed, his hands gentle as he reconnected the monitoring equipment, his voice a soothing balm as he whispered words of comfort, words that spoke of a care that went beyond duty, a care that spoke of love. "Thank you for bringing me to the square," Francis said, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Today I lived a life of service, a life of love, a life of peace." Strapeti, fighting back tears, simply replied, "I will always be here." Holy Father, his words, a promise, a vow, a testament to a friendship that had become a sanctuary, a refuge, a light in a world of shadows, a promise that would carry them through the final moments of Francis's earthly journey. The following morning, as the dawn light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting golden streaks across the room, Strapeti arrived for his shift, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding, his hands trembling as he checked Francis's chart, his eyes fixed on the man who had become his friend, his brother, his sacred charge. The Pope was sleeping peacefully, his breathing more regular than it had been in days, his face alight with a serenity that seemed to transcend the frailties of his body, a serenity that spoke of a man who had lived with a heart open to the divine, a man who had sought to be the Pope. God wanted him to be a man who had carried the burdens of the world with a quiet grace that reflected the love of Christ. Around 5:30 a.m., Francis stirred and opened his eyes, his gaze momentarily clouded with confusion, then focusing on Strapeti's face, his eyes alight with a clarity that seemed to pierce the veil between the earthly and the divine. Strapeti immediately noticed a subtle change in the Pope's coloring, a slight irregularity in his breathing pattern, his instincts honed by years of service, his heart heavy with the weight of a truth he could not ignore, a truth that whispered of the end, a truth that demanded he act, a truth that would become the crucible of their final moments together. As he reached for the call button to summon the doctor, Francis experienced a sudden illness, a stroke followed by cardiac insufficiency. His eyes widening slightly as he realized what was happening. His breath a fragile thread, his spirit alight with the hope of the eternal. In that moment of clarity between life and its conclusion, Francis summoned his remaining strength for one final profound gesture, a gesture that would become a testament to the power of love, of gratitude, of friendship, a gesture that would echo through the ages, a gesture that would refuse to be silenced. He slowly raised his trembling hand and waved, not the formal papal wave the world knew from balconies and processions, but a simple, intimate goodbye, the kind one offers only to those held most dear. His eyes now brimming with tears, locking with Strapeti's, his voice a whisper that seemed to rise like a prayer, a whisper that carried the weight of a lifetime, a whisper that spoke of the divine within the human. "Thank you, my friend," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. we'll meet again in the Father's house. Strapetti, his heart breaking yet filled with immeasurable love, took the Pope's hand in his voice steady despite the tears that streamed down his face. His words, a promise, a vow, a testament to a friendship that had become a sanctuary, a refuge, a light in a world of shadows. Until then, Holy Father, rest in peace. He replied, his voice a whisper that seemed to rise like a prayer, a whisper that carried the weight of a lifetime, a whisper that spoke of the divine within the human, a whisper that would become the final testament to a bond that had transcended the boundaries of title and status, a bond that had become a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a bond that would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of love, of gratitude, of friendship. Minutes later, Francis slipped into unconsciousness, his breath a fragile thread, his spirit alight with the hope of the eternal, his heart at peace as he crossed the threshold from this world to the next. By the time additional medical staff arrived, he was already transitioning peacefully. His passing, a quiet departure, a gentle release, a sacred moment that spoke of the divine within the human, a moment that would become a testament to the power of love, of gratitude, of friendship, a moment that would echo through the ages, a moment that would refuse to be silenced. As news of Francis's death spread the world, mourned global leaders offering condolences, crowds gathering in St. Peter's Square, bells tolling across Rome, their mournful song a requiem for a shepherd called home, a requiem that echoed through the years, a requiem that refused to be silenced. Commentators spoke of his legacy of mercy, his advocacy for the poor, his efforts to reform the church, his emphasis on environmental stewardship. Their words, a testament to the man who had lived as a servant, a man who had sought to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. But in a quiet corner of Gemelli Hospital, Massimiliano Strapetti stood alone by the window of the now empty room, watching as morning light streamed across the vacant bed, its sheets still bearing the faint imprint of the man who had lain there, its silence a testament to the sacred departure that had taken place. A departure that had united the earthly and the divine in a final tender embrace. In his hand, Strapetti held the small wooden cross Francis had always kept nearby, its edges worn smooth by years of fervent prayer, its wood a silent testament to the faith that had sustained him through the storms of his life, a faith that had guided him through the darkness, a faith that had called him to be a light in a world of shadows, a cross that Francis had pressed into his palm. During those final moments, a silent gift requiring no explanation between friends, a gift that spoke of love, of gratitude, of the divine within the human. What made the story of Pope Francis and Massimiliano Strapetti so powerful was not just the poignancy of their final goodbye, but what their relationship represented, a testament to the power of presence, of gratitude, of love, a testament to the divine within the human, a testament to the sacred bond that had grown between them, a bond that had become a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a bond that would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of love, of gratitude, of friendship, in a world obsessed with power, position and prestige. These two men, one who sat on the throne of St. Peter, one who spent his life in service at hospital bedsides, found in each other the purest expression of human connection, a connection that spoke of the divine within the human, a connection that called the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. Their story reminded the world that at life's end, titles fall away, that what remains is the authenticity of our relationships, the gratitude we've expressed, the love we've shared. A reminder that the greatest act of mercy is not in grand gestures, but in the quiet daily presence that speaks of love, of care, of compassion, a presence that becomes a sanctuary, a refuge, a light in a world of shadows. Pope Francis, who had spent his papacy emphasizing mercy and human dignity, embodied these values until his final breath. His relationship with Strapetti, a testament to the man he had sought to be, a man who lived with a heart open to the divine, a man who sought to be the Pope. God wanted him to be a man who carried the burdens of the world with a quiet grace that reflected the love of Christ. That simple wave goodbye, not a formal papal blessing, but an intimate farewell between friends, contained a profound lesson for the world, a lesson about the universal truth that our most meaningful legacy isn't built through grand achievements or accumulated wealth, but through the lives we've touched, the hearts we've held, the love we've shared, a lesson that called the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. In that sacred moment between Francis and Strapetti, the world glimpsed what truly matters: presence, gratitude, and the courage to say goodbye with grace. A courage that spoke of a faith that transcended the boundaries of the earthly, a faith that called the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. As the sun continued to rise over Rome that April morning, casting its warm light through the hospital window and across the empty bed where Pope Francis had taken his final breath, Massimiliano Strapetti finally allowed himself to weep openly his tears, a testament to the love he had shared, the gratitude he had received, the sacred bond that had become a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a bond that would endure, a bond that would prevail, a bond that would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of love, of gratitude, of friendship. The wooden cross in Strapetti's hand, simple and worn, would remain his most treasured possession, not as a relic of a religious leader, but as a memento of a friend who had taught him that gratitude is our most powerful prayer, a friend who had whispered, "Thank you," as his final words, a friend whose legacy would endure as a beacon of hope in a world of darkness, a legacy that called the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls, a legacy that reminded the world that true holiness isn't found in grand proclamations or elaborate rituals, but in genuine human connection, in the quiet presence that speaks of love, of care, of compassion, a presence that becomes a sanctuary, a refuge, a light in a world of shadows. The air in the hospital room grew still, the scent of antiseptic fading as the dawn light filled the space. The distant toll of church bells, now a faint whisper, their mournful song, a testament to the sacred departure that had taken place, a departure that had united the earthly and the divine in a final tender embrace, a departure that had left behind a legacy of love, of gratitude, of friendship, a legacy that would endure as a beacon of hope in a world of darkness, a legacy that would guide the faithful through the storms of the future, a legacy that would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of a faith that saw the divine in every soul, a faith that sought to build bridges where others built walls, a faith that called the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. What does it mean to bear witness to a friendship that transcends the mortal veil, to hold the memory of a goodbye that echoes into eternity, a goodbye that calls us to live with gratitude, to die with grace, to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge out in a world of walls, a bridge that leads us to the Father's house, where the faces we love await us in the light of the eternal,